thank you for joining us for the Drive Green Ottawa speaker series with Mike Fletcher, a project manager with the Climate Change and Resilience Department for the City of Ottawa. For those of you who don't know us, EnviroCentre is a nonprofit environmental organization based here in Ottawa. Our core mission supports sustainable lifestyle, which means that we encourage people to take action on climate in their own lives, in their homes, in their workplaces, their businesses, their communities, and right here in our city. Our work focuses on 4 key areas: green homes, green transportation, green business, and green lifestyle. So today, of course, we're here to talk about green transportation in Ottawa, and specifically zero emissions, low carbon transportation. But before we get started, I just want to highlight a few logistical notes. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared online after the event. Please remember to keep yourself muted during the presentation so that everyone is able to hear Mike speak. And finally, we will be monitoring questions in the chat box, so please type your questions in there and we will bring them forward to Mike for a Q&A period following the presentation. So now, our speaker today is Mike Fletcher, as I mentioned, a City of Ottawa project manager. Mike started his work at the city 7 years ago, doing energy conservation and energy management work for the Building Engineering and Energy Management Group. After a recent period of split responsibilities between the Conservation Group and Planning, Mike joined the Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department in April 2019 to work full-time on Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy, Energy Evolution. Prior to joining the city, Mike had a variety of jobs in the industrial sector, including experience in brewing, citric acid manufacturing, and biofuels. Mike keeps busy in his non-work hours, enjoying gardening, whitewater kayaking, and a variety of volunteering pursuits. Mike will briefly recap energy evolution and in more detail discuss its relationship to the importance of the electrification of cars and light trucks. An event like Drive Green Ottawa addresses one of the key components of electrification, but not surprisingly, there are others, which Mike is eager to discuss also. So once again, welcome everyone in our audience, and Mike, you have the digital floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Sharon, and thanks to EnviroCentre for this opportunity to let everybody know what's with personal vehicle electrification. I'll just get the screen share going. And how's that? Can people see a slide, perhaps?
We're not seeing full screen view yet.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's not full screen view yet.
Yeah.
It is.
It's just in presenter mode, Mike. We're seeing the next slide in your notes.
Oh, okay. All right. Bear with me then. How's that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, great. Excellent. So as Sharon said, I'll kind of give a quick recap of energy evolution. I think some of the people on today have seen this before, but I've kind of picked what I will speak about just to zero in on electrification of personal vehicles. And as Sharon said, certainly when we get to Q&A, happy to field lots of different questions. Good news is, of course, we had some public meetings about a month ago, so and we got many questions from that. So I'm trying to anticipate some of the questions that typically come now in the presentation. So so that's what I'm saying here, just what I have for the talk, and we'll also discuss the reason for the priority for personal vehicle electrification. Just to back up to the climate science, I think everyone knows this. The challenge is to stay below 1.5 degrees of global heating. And the model we produced, what we were directed to do by council, works on a carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. So energy evolution has a lot of very tough targets. And that's reflected by the fact that we're working on a 1.5 degree carbon budget, and everything we want to do is aligning with that. So it's more what does the science demand as opposed to being aspirational. And in the community here, you can see where emissions come from. I mean, big picture, this is easy, always easy to talk about because we can say the two and almost equal things are our buildings and our transportation. But to go by source, the pie chart on the right, we can kind of see the importance of personal electric vehicles already, because we're seeing the importance of gasoline, or the amount of emissions that come from gasoline. And of course, there's some good news in the community. Our emissions have been coming down, and the fact they've come down was worked into the model that we built, and is mostly driven by, I think as a lot of people know, the reduction in the amount of GHGs in our electricity supply, and also some local things. Good one has been the improvements at Trail Landfill in capturing methane off the landfill. These are the targets that Energy Evolution has. Again, very ambitious. Question we get a little bit is that although the corporation has to be net zero by 2040, the community gets a little bit more time to get to 100%, though they have to be almost there at 96% in 2040, and actually have to work a little harder up to 2030, and I should say more accurately, have to get more GHG emissions reductions by 2030. And that just reflects how we feel each group, the community and the corporation of the City of Ottawa, can make emissions reductions happen, given where each group has emissions coming from. So Energy Evolution, as I mentioned a few slides ago, is really, the model for Energy Evolution was really built around asking the question, okay, what do we have to do to follow the science? What's required to have a carbon budget that respects no more than 1.5 degrees of global heating? And from that, it's also a plan. So it's a transition plan. The model identifies almost 40 measures across different areas, across buildings, across transportation, across waste management, across electricity generation, that are required to hit those targets. So it's a huge transition strategy. It's hard to underestimate the scope of all the changes we foresee. Where we're at with it, so over the past few years, we've worked on pathways. So a pathway is a place where we're either using energy or producing it. If a pathway is where we're using energy, we're going to figure out how to use less of it and how to transition it to a non-emitting energy source, in that order: conservation first, then switching. If a pathway has more to do with renewable energy supply, we figure out and model how much we need. Again, and I can't emphasize this enough, the model's integrated. So municipalities are very fortunate. In the world, there are very few integrated energy models. Municipalities, including quite a few in Canada, have integrated models. Integrated means we've considered how everything affects everything else. So if you want to have more use of transit, for instance, active transportation is a feeder of that. So you can't just cherry pick and say, no, we're just going to have transit, active transportation, not so much. Well, people use bikes and they use sidewalks to get to transit. So the two are related. That's how it's integrated, and it's integrated on energy supply. So the conservation has to happen, as I said before, fuel switching to non-emissive sources. If that doesn't happen, then the energy demand goes up, and the model starts to say, whoa, we got a problem here. So those are some interesting things about the model. And again, I think having something integrated can really inform a lot of discussions where decisions are made perhaps a little bit too much on a siloed basis. We're very fortunate to have something that's integrated in this way. And our strategy, well, there are many elements to the strategy. We have to acknowledge the limited role of the municipality, but that's not to say we don't have a role. We have to consider, our jurisdictional considerations, and there's a lot of advocacy. We think will go into that. The strategy also considers some of the good news with doing this. So co-benefits, things that are mentioned often in the co-benefits report: a quieter city, less local air pollution, better health for myriad of reasons, including active transportation, making us fitter, for example. I mentioned the model, and it goes with financial analysis. A lot of what we've been doing in the past 4 months is that third last bullet. It's 5-year plans. So next month, meaning in just a few days, we'll shortly be going to committee and council, hoping to get approval. And then a lot of what's in these 20 action plans, we call project overviews, will be going into effect. So we have been doing some work. We have been installing some EV charging, planning to install more, but a lot of our time has been working on the plan, and really looking forward to the end of the year when we're done so much planning and not so much planning, and we can put more energy into implementing it. It'd be great. All right, so this is just an overview of kind of, what it takes for us to get to net zero. It's kind of by year, by big sectors. I mentioned there's actually more like 30, almost 40 actions that this could be subdivided into. So transportation at 36.7% is a big one. And if you were to subdivide that between, say, making the transit fleet zero emission and making commercial fleet zero emission and personal vehicles zero emission, and practically speaking EVs, you'll see that it's really personal vehicle electrification that's the biggie. And there it is. If you separate it out into main actions, personal vehicle electrification comes out number one. It's over 20% in that previous chart. So why is it so important? And here I'll try and kind of address some questions that we had back in August when we were doing public consultation as well. There's some foundations to understand why personal vehicle electrification is so important. Questions we would get, for example, would be, okay, why aren't you pushing transit instead, or active transportation? So the answer to that is one here. The answer to that is we are. So as a mid-sized city, we already have quite a high modal split to the transit system. So our bus rapid transit has been good at attracting riders. Compare it to other cities of 1 million people in North America, we're doing really well. But this would drive it further from 74% of trips by car and light truck down to 55%, and the rest going quite a bit to transit and also to walking, cycling, little scooters, I guess. They've become popular right under our radar. So we are doing that is the answer, but 55% is still by car, light truck. And that's just so much that it's so much of the pie that it's still, when you do the math, it's still a huge concern for us to address. This is the other thing you get out of an integrated model. You start to understand what energy sources are limited. So biofuels are limited. So, there's only so much we can get from biofuels. So, the suggestions about using renewable natural gas in the bus fleet, we hesitate a little bit about that because the plan is really that would have to help with building heating, and would be a challenge if it gets siphoned off to be used in transportation. And behind this third point, behind what I wanted to say is behind the model that gets us to being a zero emission city is a business as planned model. And business as planned doesn't mean we're not doing anything. In fact, we're actually doing a lot to become more energy efficient in business as planned, but all the benefits are wiped out by population growth. So business as planned has improvements in gas vehicle fuel efficiency. They're decreasing because we're getting marginal returns, lower marginal returns from actions to make conventional cars and light trucks more efficient. But they're still in the model, for instance, and there are all kinds of things that are in the model, you know, over on the building side, buildings getting better. So they are in business as planned. But again, to hit this, it's tough. Population grows. So we have to do more than the incremental improvements that we've maybe been doing for the past, like 30 years, attempting to address climate change. And then getting specific to cars and light trucks, the model calls for 90% of sales to be EVs by 2030 and 100% by 2040. And so I think in the Canadian context, people find that pretty aggressive. California's just said end of gas car sales at 2035. I keep reading about the UK. It looks like they're going to go with 2030. So this kind of follows on that, and it looks very aggressive. But again, everything in energy evolution, because we're working to respect the 1.5 degree global heating limit, is very ambitious. So this is, I would say, arguably less ambitious than half the other measures in energy evolution. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of what a municipality can do is through advocacy. We're not in direct control of many of the things we need to see happen under the energy evolution model. So we've given some thought to that. And these are the things we think of for advocacy. Number one, it's topical today. Drive Green Week is promotional events. We know that peer-to-peer discussions about electric vehicles as opposed to going to a car dealer, a peer-to-peer discussion or a friendly, non-transactional discussion is a great way to promote EVs. We're cotton on to that, and we think events like this one are great. Reduce EV infrastructure costs, so we'll always have a mind for this. We're lucky in Ottawa that often we can avoid some electrical charges like demand charges for EV infrastructure. We need to keep that and are looking at other ways that we can keep these costs down. So anything we can do to keep infrastructure costs low help us generally, because a lot of the infrastructure won't necessarily be by the city, it'll be other players in the city, and we want to help them out. Encourage solutions for home charging. So this comes up quite a bit. What we'd really like to see it would be a model of multi-residential building, existing one going from no EV charging to EV charging, done really well. It could be a model for other buildings. So that's something we're hoping to see and encourage. So autonomous vehicles must be electric vehicles is another one. So Invest Ottawa has a trial going of an AV. It's electric. We're reinforcing that AVs have to be electric. If AVs start to appear as gas vehicles, we got a big problem on our hands. So that one we have to push. An EV only area, that's in the model. So downtown is in 2030, electric vehicle only area. We'll need to get that implemented. And we'll monitor how well our charging keeps pace. So, a fair bit of the charging, including quite a bit of DC fast charging, is on sites where the city can see what the usage is looking like, and we can monitor that and decide if we have to take action. So, right now there's some private charging coming. There's Ivy, a couple places still have to get sparked up, like Tesla on Robertson Road and the Electrify Canada on Coventry. But there is some non-city infrastructure would need to consider that in the mix. And where it's not keeping pace as the city decide what we should do. We do have some budget, and we do have an EV policy that drives installation of charging at new facilities of the cities. So we do have some levers to put in some infrastructure to help us keep pace. There are a few areas where we do have some direct control. One is the city's Green Fleet plan, and we've had a couple successive Green Fleet plans that are a bit of really good leading by example. I think some will likely know it led to some electric Konas getting purchased for bylaw recently, and also we're probably going to be on to the next round of Zambonis, electric Zambonis, and I could go into Green Fleet a little more. Not all of it's very public facing, but it is reducing energy consumption around city fleet and emissions. And I mentioned in the previous slide too, just we have a corporate EV charging policy that drives public facing charging at city sites. So it's driven some charging already going in at the new Chapel Hill Park and Ride because of the policy. We'll get some charging, and discussions kind of starting around some of the more suburban phase 2 LRT stations that may get some charging. So that is driving some charging on the city side. And then our next steps, just what we're doing next steps. I mentioned earlier, we go to committee and then council this month. Everything's kind of up where everybody who votes on things sees it. And we're getting pinged with questions right now from the powers that be. And hopefully if all those questions suss out, that will be everything in energy evolution past. And like I said, start focusing on implementation. So we have these 20 documents that really focus on what we need to do in the next 5 years, and we'll get going on them. So I'd look forward to that. Rewriting some of these docs is, well, I understand it has to be done, but I'll just say I'd like to just start doing what I'm writing about. So more of it. So anyway, let's hope for that real soon. So that's what I have to say. Happy to field questions specifically about personal vehicle electrification or wider questions as people are interested. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to remind everybody that there is a chat box where you can put your questions if you have any. So I've posted a few initial questions to get everyone started. If you have questions, please pop them in there, and Mandy will let us know what they are. So just to start us off, I'm actually not going to start with my first question. I wanted to ask a little bit about, you talked about some of the feedback that you've got, not you personally, but as a city, around electrification and so forth. Do you find that the community is resistant to electrification and to moving to electric vehicles in general? And if that's the case, or if that's the case in certain areas, what do you think will move folks toward greater adoption? Now, I know you spoke to that a little bit with the list of priorities, but I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit more.
That's almost, we haven't really surveyed the community about this question. It's almost, Sharon, it's almost a personal question. My observation is, like with a lot of new things, we go through a curve of innovators and early adopters. And this is, kind of the first time I've been so close to living it, because I was an innovator on getting a plug-in car, and then I tell people about my plug-in car, and I see what the reaction is. Personally, I think we're kind of at the stage where people are at mature wait and see. This looks promising. I'll see there's going to be more on the market soon. So I think there's probably people who work in this field of marketing have some ideas about how people hedge their bets around this time. It'd really be interesting to talk to somebody who has expertise on that. But I don't know. I don't know if some of the participants have observations as well. But That's kind of how I see that right now.
Yeah.
I think we're past the part where people say they don't work in winter, which, you know,
Well, you know, actually,
pulling
so
our hair out for a few years.
yeah, we had a session yesterday about owning an electric vehicle and what that's like, and that was actually addressed in that session too. And I think people are still asking to some extent around those really early on questions. So one of the things that we've been trying to address as EnviroCentre, as an agency, is sort of updating people's perspectives on electric vehicles and what's the reality today. Now, one of the things that I know that the city has done, and I was saying to you before we started that we often find the city doesn't, well, we feel the city doesn't always advertise the great work that you do in energy efficiency and some of these areas. So could you speak a little bit to what the city has already done in terms of fleet electrification and what impact that may have had?
Yeah, so the city has had a green fleet program for, I think it's 6 years now. They had 2 runs of a green fleet program with some money. And the money in the program was there to go from, to pay for the cost difference between, you know, a more emitting vehicle or piece of transportation type equipment to a lesser one. So, you know, it's the most recent example was the CONUS for bylaw. Green Fleet put up the extra upfront capital to go from a gas version of those cars up to an EV version, and then, you know, the same thing on the first version of Zambonis, for instance. They put up the Delta money to pay for that. So, I mean, if I were to think of the big things that Fleet has done, they've worked hard on telematics, and they're still gonna, I think they're still gonna wring some more good benefits out of telematics. So telematics is vehicle tracking and optimization. So optimizing where the fleet moves around for when it's doing different services. And also, I believe we'll get into even looking at individual drivers that do a lot of driving and possibly coaching them. But I think that's secondary. I think it's more optimizing fleet movement. That's been a big one. I mentioned, you know, a couple of vehicle types. There's also been some of the vehicles we have been retrofitted from non-hybrids to hybrids. And a good example is the paramedic vehicles. A lot of them have been retrofitted to become a hybrid with, you know, with, you know, a post-purchase kit that effectively makes a hybrid out of the vehicle. And it's important in those vehicles because they have a lot of electrical load in them. So that's had good savings. So those are some examples. They've looked a little bit at fuel, but again, you know, it's interesting. We look at it from different angles. They consider fuel, but they certainly don't consider it to be everything. So there's some seasonal biodiesel. There's improvements coming in biodiesel that'll make get rid of basically the seasonal concerns about diesel not working in the wintertime so well because of temperature. So they're working to source that material. So they've done a little bit in fuel, but fuel's maybe not their strongest or their biggest go-to. I think they've done a lot on kind of optimizing the fleet, which has been really good work.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question from Jen in the chat. So she says, I am really happy to hear about the incentive re-EVs only in the core. Are there any examples of North American cities with an EV city center policy? Has it been a good incentive for change?
I think maybe I'll answer the last questions first. I think it does, when people see something like that coming forward in a plan, I think it does a lot to socialize zero emission vehicles. People see that and go, oh, well, that's going to happen. And that's only 10 years away. So I think you know, I'm happy it's in there. And as for other cities, to be honest, we didn't look too much at that. I didn't personally. We decided it was a good idea and defensible, and like I just said about its socializing benefits, and said let's put it in there. What we considered most was just where some other jurisdictions are with mandating electric vehicles, and that's more what we looked at than say considering what other cities specifically have done. It's a good question. I should probably do a little bit of searching around on that one on other cities, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I had posted a question in the chat as well that I'm going to rephrase a little bit. So what I was asking is, how serious is Ottawa as a municipality about moving toward net zero in your estimation? I guess another way of putting that, so we work with Energy Evolution, and we're well aware of how serious you folks are around those goals. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how the city is currently prioritizing climate action and, for instance, electrification of vehicles just as one part of the whole plan. I know there have been some steps in that direction. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the question goes to kind of the financial side of the model as much as anything else. And I think that, we've done the work in that we've shown that although there's a big upfront investment, everything pays back. And a net present value calculation shows this pays back to the community. The challenge will always be the upfront investments, which will be incremental commitments in the city's annual budget. So that is, I think that's going to be the real test. And that's what, everybody's interested will have to be keeping an eye on and be stating concern about. But that's going to play out over the next, probably the next half dozen years will be very important in that. If I think of things that are coming up for spending considerations, capital spending considerations.
Okay, so I think we've covered most of the questions in the chat. If anybody else does have a question, please post it there. It's getting toward being your last chance to do so. And while we see if anybody does post any more questions, Mike, if you could send out, this is a bit of a big question, but if you could send out a message to residents of the City of Ottawa around electrification and how City of Ottawa residents need to engage to move forward the agenda of moving to net zero, what would that be? Like a really sort of short summary. This is what you can do as a resident of the City of Ottawa to move us in the right direction.
Well, I think, to relate it to today's topic, obviously learning about EVs is probably the most important thing a resident can do. And I think part of that is understanding that, helping everyone understand and helping, and suggesting to residents that they come to understand that they should be taking a life cycle cost analysis when they go to buy a car, right? So it shouldn't be, this is burns gasoline and is so many $1,000s less. Well, yeah, you're going to be saddled with it for a lot of years, and you're going to be putting gas into it, which is way more expensive. And you might not like that it's good for the environment, that it's bad for, not as good for the environment. And you're going to have more maintenance costs and, right? So think about this. So I think that would be the most direct advice to a citizen. And then where electrification is needed across the community, I would, recommend that the residents, again, take a longer term perspective on how it'll help their community in terms of cost, and then all the co-benefits that come with it. So the community's quieter, there's no engines revving, there's less air pollution. Like, you really have to believe that, assuming we get there, And 10 or 12 years from now, we're looking back, we're scratching our head and wondering what took us so long. Right. So that's that'll kind of be my advice towards residents.
Okay. And that's actually a really good way to wind up this discussion, because a lot of the things that you touched on there are things that we are delving into in more detail in some of our other speaker sessions. So certainly the one that we had yesterday talking about personal ownership, we went into a lot of the different aspects of the relative costs and just benefits of using an electric vehicle. We'll be talking about charging stations. We'll be talking about how to buy an electric vehicle. A whole range of these topics will be covered. And for those of you who are here today, if you missed yesterday's session, we will be posting all of the sessions online, so you can follow up and learn that information later. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today.
Great.
And sharing all of these insights. That was really great. And thank you also to all of our attendees who took the time today to join us. As I say, if you enjoyed this session, don't forget to check out all of the upcoming events and activities we have this week to learn more about ZEVs. Drive Green Ottawa is presented by EnviroCentre in partnership with the City of Ottawa, with special thanks to Hydro Ottawa, EVCO, and Plug and Drive. So thank you to everyone. And of course, if you want to stay up to date on all things green, we at EnviroCentre encourage you to stay in touch. You can do this by signing up for our weekly Green Lifestyle Digest, the Green Beat, or by signing up for our daily green tips, which are very good. And by the way, this week, all about electric vehicles, so you can learn more that way. We'll be posting those links in the chat also, events and all, so don't leave until you've checked out those links. So we're going to wind up with our closing video moments from now. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.